got me. All right, so FBAs and BIPs, the first thing to know is that they go together. So you will hear, and you may sometimes just hear somebody say, we're gonna do an FBA. Well, there should always be a BIP with it. We love to throw around those letters. FBA is a functional behavioral assessment. Behavior intervention plan is a BIP. So we do an assessment to figure out what the function of behavior is, the why. And then once we think we have that figured out, we write our hypothesis, then we write a plan on what we're going to do about it. So what you all have been doing is taking baseline data. You have determined your function of behavior. You've done a lot of the data collection for the functional behavioral assessment. Your next phase will be the behavior intervention plan. You're choosing an intervention and putting it into place and continuing to take data. So the practical application of what you're doing in your study falls right along with what you'll need to do for FBAs and BIPs. It is part of the law, starting with Public Law 94-142, which we call the Mother Law. It's the original special ed law. It addresses academic, this is review for IEP stuff. IEP addresses academic, transitional, and functional goals, and also has short-term benchmarks. In 1997, IDEA 1997 brought forth a functional behavioral assessment if the student's behavior impacts their learning. So that is how we decide if we're going to do an FBA. If the student's behavior is impacting their learning, you need to have a behavioral intervention plan, an FBA and a BIP. That means every single student identified as having an emotional behavioral disorder, or an emotional disorder or a behavior disorder, depending on what your district is using for language, must have an FBA and BIP every year. That means many of our students with ASD, because a lot of those are behavioral, not academic, they will have an FBA, BIP. Other students, even if they're identified as having traumatic brain injury or intellectual cognitive disability or other health impaired, OHI, they may need a functional behavioral assessment and BIP if they have behaviors that are negatively impacting their learning. So basically, if you are going to have to be writing behavior goals for a kid, they should have a functional behavioral assessment and a behavior intervention plan. About the only kids that across the board don't tend to have this are kids who are only identified as having a specific learning disability in an academic area. So if you have a student that strictly is there for dysgraphia or dyscalculia, you know, they have a specific learning disability in math, more than likely that kid's probably not going to need an FBA, BIP, if that's the only thing we see going on. It is written as a team, so just like the IEP, this is not a solo mission. When you do this for real, it is done in a team setting. Sometimes it is done with an IEP, more often than not, it is a separate meeting. But you have the IEP team with you. So you need your LEA, your administrator or your district representative. Parents absolutely should be included in these meetings. The student, if they are of an age that they can understand. Kindergartner, probably not going to get an FBA, BIP. Middle schoolers and high schoolers probably should be in there because they're the ones with the behaviors. They should be able to be part of that discussion. And amazingly, they often could add light that maybe they don't until they're in that meeting. The special ed teacher, the gen ed teacher, and then any other service providers. So if they get speech language, if they get OTPT, if they get, they're in high school and they're getting ready to transition out, they're on the older end, if they have a transition coordinator, any of those type of things, that person should be included as well. Reasons for referrals to special ed. When people think about special ed, we think about the IEP and we think about academics. That's why people get referred, academics. That is actually less often than behavior. we see more kids getting referred for behavioral concerns. And not all those referrals are legit. But quite often, if you think about the process to get us to a referral, we should all be doing RTI. For many schools, RTI focuses still on academics, even though it's supposed to be both academics and behavioral. So a lot of schools, unless you're in a strong PBIS school, don't have those tiered supports for kids with behavioral needs. So we just automatically jump to referral if we're seeing a lot of behaviors. So you will see a lot of this. When we talk about disproportionality, boys are referred more often than girls. Disproportionality, brown and black boys are referred more often than any other population. And or brown and black girls are referred over white girls. We see kids of any kind of racial background being referred for behavioral concerns more often, and it's called disproportionality. And it is a big topic in the field. Now, I know in a lot of our rural communities, we don't have a lot of diversity, so you may or may not see this. But what you will see no matter where is you will see the gender. You will see that there is a split in gender. And when we're talking specifically referred for behavioral, we see more often than not boys referred more often than girls. We see more boys having FBAs and BIPs than girls. Now, does the research support that they have more behaviors? No. It's different types of behaviors. Think about what we see little boys doing on the playground. They're shoving and they're hitting and they're, playing dodgeball even if they're not supposed to, and all those very outward behaviors. And so, yeah, we start documenting those and taking data and referring. But think about that same, say they're 5th grade, 5th, 6th grade. Think about that same playground. What are those girls doing? Talking behind, what else? Spreading rumors, alienating people, calling people names, but they do it quietly. Teachers don't catch it. And if a monitor comes around, what do? Smile sweetly. Hi, we're fine. We all lived through middle school, right? So we see that disproportionality basically because of the type of behaviors we see. Physical and medical is kind of an automatic. If a kid is in an accident and ends up with a traumatic brain injury, they're going to get referred. So those are not as gray of an area. But we need to remember that we need to be focusing just as much on behavior and not just for boys. All right, so you guys should know this. We've been through this multiple times. You guys have practiced it and done a great job. Defining a target behavior. First thing to remember is target behavior means it's the negative behavior. We're targeting it for extinction. We're targeting because we want it to go away. It's got a bullseye on it. You want to make sure you're not taking in biased information, and not that anyone is purposely putting biased information out there. But if a teacher is really frustrated and has had a really rough day with a kiddo, that might be some slanted information you're receiving. And we've all been there. You're just at wit's end. We've probably done it with our own kids. Those of us who have kids, you're at wit's end. And at the end of that day, you do not want to ask me about my child. So making sure you're getting across people, across scenarios, that it's not just a mismatch in personality, a mismatch in skills, a teacher who just maybe a new teacher, or on the other end of the spectrum, a teacher who's been there for 35 years, who doesn't know how to deal with behaviors. Because 35 years ago, we told kids, sit down, shut up, or go to the office. They didn't get training in how to deal with behaviors. And the new teachers coming out, they think they're being mean if they redirect. I can't tell you how many times I have to explain it's not being mean, it's behavior management. Their favorite thing is it's not fair. Life is not fair. I don't know what to tell you. But it's a hard one for both of those groups, and some people in the middle. So just making sure that it truly is a behavioral issue. It's not some other variable that we're dealing with. It has to be observable, which means what? See it or hear it. Hopefully not smell it. And measurable means
Can be counted.
can be counted one way or another. This is just an overview of the IEP components. We'll go through the IEP in different classes. We've already gone through them in some classes. You guys just looked at transition planning for the IEP last summer. But this is kind of where the FBA BIP fits in. Just so you can kind of mentally figure out where it is in that, because we know those IEPs are pretty thick. So response to intervention, which is a gen ed initiative. It is not a special ed initiative, and that's a really hard thing for people to understand. And 20 years ago when it came out, it was a really hard thing for people. It was never supposed to be about special ed, folks. It is a general education initiative. And all it really is a problem-solving model. You identify the problem, you figure out why it's happening, you discuss with the team what should be done about it, and then you monitor it to see if it works. So you take that model and you put an FBA BIP in there, folks. What is the problem? That's part of our functional behavioral assessment. We take data to determine what the problem is and how bad it is. Why is it happening? That's our function of behavior. That's our hypothesis on, is it avoiding something or gaining something? What should be done about it? That is the team conversation, writing the behavior intervention plan. Did it work? Once we implement that intervention, we need to continue taking data to see if it's working or not. And you'll notice this is secular. Did it work? If the answer is yes, all right, are we done? Do we fade it? Do we keep it? What do we do? If the answer to did it work is no, we go back to the top. Maybe we have the wrong problem. Maybe we define the behavior wrong. Maybe we have the wrong function, and we go back through the process. This is an ongoing loop. All right, so breaking down the FBA, big picture. The point of the FBA is to identify the problem behavior. What is happening? And you want to give a thorough description. Where and when is it happening? That's why we talk about taking data in different settings. That's why we talk about taking that anecdotal data. We write our hypothesis about why we think it's happening. The team believes that the function of behavior, the function of the head down behavior is to avoid non-preferred tasks. That's our function. ABCs, that's any good FBA is going to have an ABC chart with it. And that's why we did that step first. Okay? That's where we start to identify what is that behavior. Now, why do we do this? Why is it important we do this? The goal of any FBA and BIP, the end goal, is to teach a replacement behavior. We want to get rid of that target behavior and in its place, teach a new behavior that's a pro-social behavior. Or we might realize that we need to make a change in the situation that the student displays those behaviors in. I'm going to use Bambi as an example. Bambi works with a certain student, and the student will follow a direction that Bambi gives her. Another parent comes in and works with that student, and that student does not follow any directions that are given to her. So in that situation, if the behavior is only happening with one para, the negative behavior, then we would want to switch out. There's a reason that for some reason there's a mismatch there. And it's really easier to adjust environment than it is to adjust a behavior. Now, if we see it is only marginally, yes, she'll follow Bambi's direction, but only for 30 seconds, and then she goes back to doing whatever. And then the third para it doesn't do anything with, then we know it's a generalized problem. Changing para is not going to be the answer. So we've got to think about, are there environmental strategies that we can change? Is it only happening in certain, a really common one that is much better now, because I don't think kids have to do as much for PE, but like when kids used to have to shower for PE and there were kids that were getting teased and there was nobody there and it was really traumatic experience. You know, the easiest thing is to let a kid not shower after PE. Yes, you have to shower at home, either before or after school. You know, you work with the family, you make sure the kid is hygienic. But if that's where these behaviors are coming from and a student is having total meltdown so they don't have to go to PE all because they don't want to take a shower, then the easiest thing there is remove the shower and see if the behavior goes away, they're still getting the physical exercise, they're still getting the social emotional learning, they're still getting all of that. And if you have a strategy to make sure they're still showering somewhere, then what does it matter? So you've got to always look at the environment and say, is this situational and is there something in the environment we can change that will change this behavior? For some, the answer is yes. For some, no. If it is a kid who will not shower because they will not get near water, and so they're not showering at home and they're not showering at school and they're not showering anywhere, then no, changing that environment isn't the answer because they've got to get used to taking a shower somewhere. So you've got to think about is environment, but it is always easier to change environment than it is to change behavior. To teach other schools that will increase the likelihood skills that will increase the likelihood of appropriate behaviors. Again, if we can teach the skills to get a replacement behavior, if we can give them the opportunity to show us that they can do it differently. And that FBA always leads to a BIP. We should not just be doing a function of behavior assessment and saying, yep, we figured out this is the behavior, and then letting it go there. There has to be a plan to change it. So it always leads to that BIP. So the BIP, what's the overview of the BIP? First, we start with student strengths. We'll actually do this both for the function of behavior as the FBA and the BIP. And that is because we always want to be strengths-based. Whether we're in an IEP meeting, a transition meeting, an FBA meeting, we always want to start with student strengths. But I feel it is especially important here because we're talking about negative behaviors and that can be really stressful for parents. So to set the tone of the meeting, these are the things the kid really does well because they've probably already heard all the things the kid's doing wrong because they've had all the calls home. And the other teachers have already been, excuse my French, but bitching in the teacher's lounge, okay? We don't want the meeting to turn into that. We want to start it on a positive note.